Minister has very graciously agreed to take questions, but I would first like the students from the School of International Studies to ask questions, but I also wanted to convey the profound gratitude of one of our colleagues, Professor Hariram Mishra, who lost his daughter in an accident in Belgium, and he's deeply grateful by the manner in which your office, sir, and the embassy in Belgium acted with speed, and he wants that that investigation be fully carried out. Thank you, sir, on his behalf. Any students, please show your hands. We have a couple of rowing. Yes, from JNU IR Society. Yes, please go ahead. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sanjeet, a PhD candidate at SIS. I work on Swatantra Party's foreign policy. My question for Minister is that in the first 2 decades of the 21st century, India saw a rising China and consolidating Russia as a key partner in reforming the global governance institutions in anticipation of the coming multipolarity. However, how do Russia's invasion of Ukraine and China's border clashes change New Delhi's calculus with regard to this informal RIC consensus on reforming multilateralism? Thank you.
2 or 3 questions? Or? Three at a time. So, I want a gender balance. Bharat, you're not a student right now.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister, sir, for your insightful discourse. As you have spoken time and again, that the globalization, the trends of globalization have been held hostage to some whims and fancies of self-appointed chaudharis, as you had rightly pointed out. Now, how do you see the self-appointed chaudharis reacting to India's rise and as India carves out its own path in the globalized sphere? I'm Shorajyoti Roy Chaudhary, sir. I'm a PhD candidate at the Center for West Asian Studies.
One of our women students, girl students, please. Yes, please go ahead.
Hello. Good evening, sir. We are extremely overwhelmed here to have you with us. I'm Ashita Shankarshan and I am from MEPISM second year. And we would like to know more about your experiences in JNU, sir. We would like to hear more, some of the interesting anecdotes that you experienced here, sir. Thank you.
Sir.
The last question.
Good evening,
the
sir.
last question is a particularly hard one.
Good evening, sir. Shreya Nautiyal this side.
No, after the
Let
next
me
round.
deal with these 3.
Okay. Next round.
Yeah. So, I'll start with the first one. You know, the China, Russia, how did we start? How did the world look 20 years ago? And where are we today? Look, 20 years ago when BRICS started, the way the global landscape was, it was still very dominated by the end of the Cold War. The Western countries had a sense of triumph. They essentially operated the global system like they owned it. And what it did therefore was to leave out a number of players who felt that they should have greater influence or say in how the world worked. And in a sense, that was part of the reason how countries like Russia, India, China, Brazil came together. South Africa joined a little bit later. Now, it was not that even at that time there were no contradictions between them. I mean, we've had a border problem with China. I mean, since since the start, you could say, in a way, and we were essentially finding ways of working together when it suited us, such as pressing for a greater say in how the world order was running, while managing our contradictions. Now, what happened in 2020 was essentially the Chinese chose to take a series of steps which made that management very difficult, because by disregarding, after all, you look from the 1980s, or accurately from the 1990s, almost for 30 years, no blood had been shed on the border. There were a series of agreements. They may not have been observed 100%, but essentially they kept the border relatively calm and stable. Now, by disregarding those agreements, especially the 93 and 96, and there were some 2005, 2012, the Chinese have created a new situation on the border, because our only response at that time was to counter-deploy in strength on the line of actual control. Now, has this affected the cooperation which we had in the multilateral side, in the plurilateral side? I think it's natural that it would have an impact, because you can't have a sort of a standoff at the border, which is very militarized and very tense, and then say, let's go to the next room and work together. I mean, to some extent you can, if there are very transactional issues out there. But as a general supposition, it makes, working together that much harder. So I think we have to, international relations is not a static business. We continuously move with times. So it's a little bit like your phone, you have to keep refreshing it. So I think after the sort of last set of updates today, we have to see how best we can forge ahead. Now, in the meanwhile, other things have also happened. I mean, the position of the United States has changed. This was a country previously which was not, particularly keen to work outside its alliance construct. That has given way to much greater openness, because the United States realizes today that it is overstretched. So, in a sense, today we have more compulsions, but we also have many more options. So, responding, I would say, to the totality of things, you're getting today a very different architecture come into play where India is concerned. So, the sense of multipolarity, to have multi-vector relationships at the same time, this is much more possible. It is much more effective in 2024 than, say, it would have been 20 years ago. Trends of globalization, what would people say? That, that is a constant struggle, because as I said, we are seeing economic rebalancing. A country like India today has become 5th largest economy, probably go up in the order. Some of it is expressed as political rebalancing, we can see that too. But there are many other conversations which go on. There are cultural conversations, there are ideological conversations. There are, in different domains, there are ways of asserting hegemony and resisting it. And a lot of it we see, in that kind of, the ratings, the media coverage, the judgment passing. These are all sort of part of the toolkit, you can say. And the fact is, it's a competitive world. We have to acknowledge that it exists. We have to recognize it. We have to contest it. And quite frankly, that's what we are doing. JNU anecdotes. That's a difficult one. I mean, I can only say I came in '73, and at that time all the studies was in the old JNU campus. I moved into the first hostel which was then opened, which was Kaveri. And for me, still, therefore, the old campus and the Kaveri, Periyar, Godavari complex is, for me, still the heart. You'll mention why, you'll ask yourself why Godavari. And the answer is I met my first wife. She was also studying there. So we were students together. It has a lot of happy memories.
Second round of questions. The lady student there at the corner, yes.
Good evening, sir. Shreya this side from School of International Studies. My question is that how can Bharat as a nation, as you mentioned, that it'll, since there's a divide now, so how will it navigate its way by distinguishing between being non-West and being anti-West, especially and what will be its stance in the future with respect to the ongoing geopolitical tensions that we're witnessing today? Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, get up.
Hello, sir. My name is Bharat. I'm a student of Chinese Studies. I'm a PhD scholar of Chinese Studies, JNU. Sir, my question is, in what fundamental ways is the world order which you envision for Bharat different from Western liberal order? If not, then is our sense of civilization permanently dominated by Western civilizational values, something which Gandhi questioned in the Hind Swaraj? Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Am I audible? Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm Ishita. I'm a first year student at SIS. So my question is that a part of India's rise in the world is also a diplomatic presence, and we do have a shortage of diplomats, especially compared to other countries. So what are we doing to improve that, or what can be done to make sure that the quantity improves but the quality is also not compromised? Thank you, sir.
The first question. Look, we are a liberal democracy. We are a market economy. We are an incredibly plural society. I would say perhaps one of the most pluralistic I've seen in all my travels around the world. So in many ways, if you look at our societal attributes, they are not in discordance with the Western world, because these are, many of them, qualities which the Western world prizes, and often I think they need to be reminded that each of these qualities we are actually performing better than them. But that's a different matter. Now, the problem for us is, while we share many of these attributes, the world order is still one, you can say, broadly engineered after the Second World War, but which carried all the advantages of the imperialism, the period of imperialism and colonialism before that. And so the dice is loaded in many, many ways in favor of Western countries. And as a rising power, often, we want space, we want a say, we want more rights, we want, we need to build more capabilities. So at one level, you agree with them on many things, but at another level, you have to fight and contest and argue and push in order to get that space and that place. So there's a duality. I mean, life is not a linear, it's not a one-dimensional exercise. And actually, we Indians are very good at managing multiple identities and multiple realities. So our effort today, because here's the problem. If we get drawn into a plain and simple anti-West position, we actually may end up inadvertently supporting, other players who do not have an interest in India's rise, who can be very competitive with us, and who, through their own behavior, often actually damage us. So it's very, we've got to walk this with a great deal of skill and with a great deal of, I would say, sensitivity. Sometimes you lean a little bit this way, sometimes you lean a little bit that way. But if I were today to look at the big economic issues, what the COVID, for example, has taught us, that we are today, our level of manufacturing is way, way below what it should be for an economy of our size and our stage of development. Now, it has serious national security implications. You know, when COVID started, as one of the 5 ministers who was in a group charged by the PM with dealing with COVID, we looked at the capacity of the country. It was frightening. Now, in the last 3 or 4 years, we have tried to plug that gap and really give a push in terms of health capacities. But if you look at other areas, I mean, when we, for example, had the problem, when we had this clash at Galwan, then we looked at, our exposure on the digital side. There were games and apps which were soaking up really, tens, if not hundreds of millions of people's data. So we, today, how do we, prepare, how do we find the right combination of players for a particular objective? So what it does is, it creates a very, very differentiated landscape. You can have the Quad, but you can have the Shanghai Cooperation. Okay. So you can have the IMEC, you can have the Chennai Vladivostok, you can have the North-South Transport Corridor with Russia and Iran. So I would argue that in a world where you have different combinations, different issues, different partnerships, the country which is able to derive the most is by participating in the most, but not at the cost of your core interests. I mean, you have to be very clear. You don't join just because it is there. There are some things you stay away from. I mean, we stayed away from Belt and Road because Belt and Road violated our sovereignty. So you've got to apply your mind, pick and choose, decide where you want to be in, where you want to be out, who you work with, who you don't want to work with, on which issue you want to work with. That's today become really the foreign policy exercise. On leading from that to the follow-up question in a way, that we want an order, but are we really capable of constructing something beyond a Western liberal order? My sense is it is coming. It is coming today because a lot of countries are not comfortable with the manner in which the liberal Western order itself has evolved. Because the liberal Western order very often seeks to impose cultural values, their cultural values. It is extremely intrusive. It is often very judgmental. And there are countries who today really say, I don't need to take that from this particular order. So I would say, in a way, the ideological evolution of the Western order actually imposes certain, it creates antibodies, okay? It creates certain limits about its own acceptance and its own universality. And I cannot tell you what would be an alternative order. I think there'll be a long twilight zone where countries would contest. But I want you to think of something, a number which I read, which made a very deep impression on me. To some of the students in the room, I would say, when you are about my age, the GDP of India, according to Goldman Sachs, would be 52.5 trillion. Think about it. So when one of you is sitting here at that time, you will be representing a different India, you will be thinking a different India, you will be living a different India. So now, such an India surely is not going to function on the rules and norms and suggestions which were invented by other people. It will want its say. It will want its influence. And we won't be the only one. There'll be others also. So, in a way today, the challenge for us is having, essentially we have from 1947 slowly kind of, pulled ourselves up in a construct which was in a world which was invented by other people. we have reached a certain point. You know, the last 10 years have been very solid progress for us. But that becomes a foundation, certainly to contemplate the next 25. And in the next 25, we'll have to think through our own solutions, our own ideas, in a way our own ambitions. There will be differences with, with many of the established powers. I mean, even your best friends sometimes don't like you rising too fast. So these will be the realities with which we will have to deal. But it is something which awaits us. It's certainly, as I said to the students, if you look at pretty much any growth projection of India of the next 50 years, these are very powerful incentives for us to work very hard to make the right choices and to ensure that the trajectory remains solid. The question about diplomats, I get it very often. So I give a sort of a yes and no answer there. First of all, different diplomatic services, different countries count their diplomats in very different ways. We tend to, so when people look at how many Indian diplomats are there, they actually pick a figure of a certain category of people who pass a UPSC exam, get 3 initials after their name on that, and then say, okay, that's the aggregate of what they are. If you actually look at the number of people in embassies, the number is very much more than that. The number is because there are other streams which join the embassies, including from the Ministry of External Affairs. There are streams outside the foreign ministry which join the embassies. And in fact, different countries have different models of working. In many cases, we tend to rely on local people much more. But so the answer is, would you need more diplomats? Would you seek more diplomats? Absolutely. And in fact, we've just got an increase from the government of roughly about 20% expansion in our strength. But at the same time, I ask you to think of the counter question. If the numbers are as small as you all think it is, why are we doing as well as we are doing? Think about it.
Yeah. With your indulgence, sir, if I can just take a round of final faculty questions and with the permission of the Vice Chancellor. So final questions. Yes. Mr. Ketkar, you're not part of the faculty, but I'd still...
I'm not asking as a journalist and definitely not to the Minister of External Affairs. I'm a student of, I've been a student of SIS and I'm asking to an author. Sir, in SIS we have learned about, from Morgenthau to Walsh to, Kissinger's. And when I see and I read your writings as an author from the India way to why Bharat matters, you bring in a totally different perspective when you are bringing Mahabharata or Ramayana or Indian perspective. One, how do you see that we can bring in this fresh Indian perspective and theorization while teaching, learning in the School of International Studies? And two, how far this helps you? Because you have also trained in the same School of International Studies that we have studied. But where was that turning point where you felt that, it is Mahabharata and Ramayana that can give us a different perspective?
After this question is answered, I'll leave it to Dr. Kashyap to finally...
I know we have many more questions, but all good things have to be... Okay, sorry, sir.
Hang on a minute. I don't want to correct you, but I was just checking with my colleagues. I have a little bit of time, so let me take a round of questions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So don't worry, we can sit here and conduct it, so you can open up the floor. I'd be happy to take the floor.
So, Bharat and then Manish. And I'm partial to SIS, I'm very sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Jaishankar, for clarifying a lot of those things. I wish that we will have much more interaction with our SIS faculty and the students, because that is our raison d'etre. Now, one thing which I'd like to ask you, of course, you spoke very well about the, our India's commitment to international law and compliance with international law. That is exactly where a lot of our things we have been doing with the International Court of Justice. But one thing which I thought I really wonder is, although we have been eyeing for the permanent seat in the Security Council, with veto, without veto, we don't know, that the time will tell. But why do we feel hesitate? Because you have to look at the entire spectrum of how the United Nations is working or not working. But one of the organs of United Nations which is lying dormant is the United Nations Trusteeship Council. And which now it is on the agenda. The Secretary General of the United Nations has put as a part of his common agenda. The Summit of the Future is probably going to deal with it. Why not we make a policy statement? And there is a proposal already pending with the Prime Minister of India. Legal opinion was also taken. Why not? Because that will probably give much more legitimacy about our claim to have a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. And there is no cost. You don't make a new entity. There is no cost to it. Just you need to open the Trusteeship Council hall and change the rules of the business, and it can be given a new mandate, what is called the repurposed Trusteeship Council. I have given a proposal to Amitabh.
Yeah, we'll pass it on to you.
Thank you.
Dr. Dabare.
Thanks, Professor Mattu. I have a very small question. 2019, sir, you gave an address on dogmas of Delhi. So, after all these years, after 5 years, which of them have been buried happily and which remain to be sent to the grave? Thank
you. The first question about using Mahabharata and Ramayana, it's not something which is a new thought. So please be assured it's a very non-political approach that I bring to international relations. How it actually started, I think most people, you read about it even when you were relatively young. And I grew up in a household where there were very active and very provocative discussions. So, my house was like a variant of JNU in a way, where you are continuously challenged, even amongst the family. And the idea of thinking of Mahabharata itself as a very, very complex, as a world in itself, which had its complexities, which had its, all the what we learnt in political science, let us say balance of power, hedging, it was something you started picking up then, and I still remember when I was still, in fact, a student in JNU, my father asking me to sit down and plot on a map of India, who lined up, and it's a very interesting exercise. I encourage you all to do it as well. You take a look who was on which side, of the war, and you will actually get a very elaborate balance of power map of India, because in many cases the choices which were made were less ethical choices. They were partly, and the familial linkages were very common. These were kingdoms which made their choices based on, who's my neighbor, and then who's my neighbor's neighbor, and that's kind of the logic which would apply. In fact, there is a debate even in Mahabharata when Krishna is discussing how to do regime change in Magadha with Jarasandha. They are actually discussing which are the other kingdoms which would then be destabilized if you remove the fulcrum power, if you bring about regime change now. Ramayana was less, I would say, less of a political science friendly saga, but it has very powerful aspects to it. So so in many ways, I'm now indulging myself in thoughts which I have nursed for many, many years. And, certainly, for me, because, I'm also an accidental political science student. Somebody asked me about my anecdotes of JNU. If I were to write my JNU, I would title it Accidental Student, because I was a student in an institution next door called the IIT. I wasn't enjoying myself there. And fortunately, JNU had a strike. So admissions that year were delayed in JNU. So although I was a student in IIT, it still gave me a chance to apply to JNU and to actually join JNU. But, as someone who got into this domain actually out of interest, and then kept it, then it became for me a profession. But it wasn't like going to office. I enjoyed being a foreign service officer. I enjoyed writing and reading and speaking about world politics and world culture and world history. So I think it flowed as a kind of a continuum from all of that into how it's become. But I feel very strongly about it because again, many of us have read these accounts where people say, India doesn't have a strategic culture. There's no definitive book in India written about this. So you don't, if you don't have a Morgenthau and you don't have a Kenneth Walsh and you don't have a Machiavelli, and depending on who you pick. Now, in many cases we do. It's just we ourselves don't speak about it. In some cases, if we don't, we need to make an effort and create them. So I'm very much, if I were to think of a project ahead in my life, it would actually be to try to get together a kind of an Indian strategic thought distillation, that I can go out to the world and say, listen, you want to know what is strategic thinking in India? Here is this book. It's clearly something beyond my individual capacity, but it is something which interests me very, very deeply, and I would certainly hope that I can try and do something about it. On the United Nations, look, there's no backdoor entry. Okay. If we want reform of the United Nations, you can't reform a house without reforming the core of that building. So we have to in a sense, to confront the main problem. And the main problem is to get the momentum to actually get serious conversations going. Now, interestingly, because, I know it since I directly, supervised that particular process, there's actually been some movement that for the first time the UN is hearing from different countries what are the models of reform which they would prefer. So there's a presentation right now. We had the two co-chairs of the intergovernmental negotiations in India recently. They also spoke here. So I'm very convinced, I'm not living in a fantasy world. I do believe that, the tailwind of history it's with us, that there is a momentum in the world, that we were, even 20 years ago when this whole thing started, we were not seen as the obvious candidate. Today, if you ask most countries in the world, so tell me who's missing, I guarantee you the vast majority will think of us. So, we are gaining ground. It is taking place. It won't be easy. But I don't think there are other routes which will help us. I think we have to, in a way, get the core membership to accept that. And it's not like Security Council has never been expanded. There's been one expansion of non-permanent members. So we'll have to keep plugging away at it. On which dogmas have been buried. Well, one dogma which I found very interesting in 2014 was people told me Modi didn't know anything about foreign policy. I think that's buried very, very deep. And if you look at these 10 years, you actually, and to me, frankly, it was also a revelation, how much, a person's travel, personal interest, has and in a way, I would say, how experiences are transferred from one domain to another. But there are, there are issues. I still think there's the tendency that we are very risk averse even now. So if we progress on any relationship, it's not always applauded. People say, no, maybe we're going too fast. Maybe we shouldn't be tying ourselves up to somebody else so deeply. That's a kind of a risk aversion which keeps popping up. There's also a natural inclination to hedge. Now, hedging is good if you think it through, and for a hedging you must have a baseline and then you must do a hedge. You can't do hedges completely without any roots on the ground at all. Hedging does not mean not having positions on any issue. It means having a position and then kind of nuancing on it or de-risking on it. But there will be issues, I think, where we'll have to have clarity, on how we go. And certainly, I would say, for me, when I look back from that lecture to where we are today, when I delivered that lecture, there was still, people were quite uncertain. For example, how would Quad really develop? Because there is, our history with America is a difficult history. And not all of us have that ability to put that history behind and say, okay, let me, they have changed, we have changed, let's find ways of moving forward. Or I think there was the appreciation of what we were doing in the Gulf. There was a very kind of lazy effort to say, well, our politics has taken this direction and therefore will be very difficult to work with those countries. In fact, it has proven to be exactly the opposite. So I would say today we are at least in that stage where as a polity, as a society, as a government, today India does look at new ideas. It does take risks. It does take new initiatives. It creates new relationships. I mean, that has been very much the story of the last decade. So I would say many dogmas have been put to rest, but many remain, still have residual life.
Thank you.